Hello, everyone. Wanted to talk to you today about half spectrum or full spectrum magnesium and what that means. A lot of people have no problem thinking about full spectrum when it comes to plants. They see, okay, it's got a range of compounds, and this one has just an isolated factor in it, and so this is full spectrum, this is half spectrum, or less than full spectrum, or whatever, isolated. And so it's harder to think of this same reality when it comes to minerals. Minerals seem to be more static and therefore not very malleable to some degree. But when you study the human body and you see all the catalytic associations and conjugations and uptake and bonding and membrane transport and the chelation powers and the enzyme assisted chelation and I guess you could say the whole enzymatic world in general and how it operates on these minerals in the body. Its immune system function acting as little sentinels. We know that, that's why they put copper doors in the hospitals, because it repels bacteria. And so these things are at the cellular level. Minerals have a very interesting radiation that we're just beginning to understand. And so this notion of half and full spectrum may start to make a little bit more sense. So what do I mean by half spectrum? Well, if you take any, basically 95% of the magnesium on the market is coming from a generic molecule. So basically the base molecule of the magnesium is generic. Meaning we don't really know exactly where they're getting it from. So like they have the magnesium bisglycinate or citrate or whatever, but the base molecule, where do they get that from? What is that? And so we kind of skip right over that and we go straight into the process, which is the citrate or the orotate, pedalate, whatever. We go into the process of how they did it or what they're doing to that molecule or that metal or that mineral salt, whatever. So instead of focusing there, focus on what is the base compound, what is the base molecule, what does it look like, what do its tentacles look like, how effective is it, and so when we do that, we get into trouble because most of the magnesium we find is coming from magnesium carbonate, which is extracted from varying types of chalk and dolomites and different types of areas where you can either find a natural magnesium in association with something else, calcium, potassium, whatever, and then do some process to separate it and bring it back down to only the magnesium. Or you can go, I guess you can go dirtier and dirtier depending on the industry, meaning you can find something in a pure state and not have to do a lot of processing, or you can find something that's already attached to a bunch of different things, and then you have to do more and more processing. So in some regions where you can, get away with more processing at a cheaper labor cost or whatever it is, well, then you can have dirtier and dirtier stuff to begin with, which is kind of the sad truth of this. And so, so finding like what you would call, they call it in Holland, this Zechstein C, this exact magnesium, they call it white gold. And the reason is because you have to find gold. You can't like make it, you have to find it. That's the problem. And whereas the other stuff, you can take something that's dirtier and bring it back up to that magnesium. With magnesium, it's different than gold, right? I guess it's like, so it's not perfectly comparable, but what I'm saying is you can find something and then bring it back up to like a pure state. At least you think it's pure, like it sounds pure on paper. Like, look, we got this great magnesium product, this base molecule, which has been had to be extracted from a very rough situation where it was interwoven with all these other potassium, heavy metals, and other things. And we put all these solvents on it and pulled all that out, and then the solvents were reduced, and here we go. We have magnesium chloride, and everybody's happy. But the problem is, once you get to that level, you've already neutered the molecule. The molecule's little tentacles have little stubs on them, right? And so this makes it harder for the molecule to pick up and chelate and bond and form conjugations and activate enzymes And everything that it does in the cell, at the cell level, um, through the membrane transport, all of its functions become limited because of that, what you've done to the molecule itself, right? So this is a molecular thing we're talking about here, this full spectrum. It's not a big umbrella discussion. It's right at the center. And so the full spectrum comes in with those tentacles and how this magnesium molecule works. Now, tentacles may not be the right word, whatever, but when you see the molecule structure and how it branches out. Magnesium is the center structure of the plant molecule, meaning chlorophyll. So if you go to the center of the chlorophyll molecule, you have magnesium as its sun, I guess you could say, that constellation. And just like iron is the sun of the constellation that we call hemoglobin, or the blood. The blood platelet, this center molecule is iron. So there's this connection there too about the importance of magnesium there. But when we come to full spectrum, it's giving the magnesium its natural state. So the Zechstein sea had to go through this process of 250 million years. It had to separate from the main ocean twice in its history. And in that separation, all of these minerals were purified and rarefied. And so 250 million years later, we have this total crystallization process that leads to this soft stone. It's like translucent. You can see almost through it, and it's an enormous discovery. If you look at the Zechstein Sea, it's like, it's not half the size of Europe, but it's an enormous block. Take that and dissolve it with just water. Source water too, not like just random chlorinated municipal water. This is source water from the local farm, of which it is, where this site is. And that source water touches this stone and it melts. And so that like a salt, it just dissolves naturally into 31% concentration. Then we bring that back up, we bottle it in glass. So first part of the half spectrum, the full spectrum, is making sure the molecule that's at the base of all these things is naturally built to where its tentacles are completely open, completely sticky, and completely ready to go in the body and pull endocrine disruptors, aluminum, heavy metals, acid residues, anything else out, lactic acids and things that pull out and cause aging, and it helps to bring these things out of the body through the sweat glands, through the pores of the skin, through every other emunctory possible, this release of this. Sweating, of course, will release it faster, but even in daily life, there's a microtranspiration and things are moving along. As long as the magnesium levels at the cellular level are correct and they're not deficient, the deficiency is going to bring about less detoxification, of course. So it's like that overness that allows us to go not just to survive, but to go beyond that and get some stuff out, right? Spring cleaning or whatever. Like, if you're just in survival mode, you're not spring cleaning, right? You're just trying to survive. You're not just working on points for style at that point. So this is the first half of the full spectrum idea, is that the molecular base and 95% of molecules, not to mention most magnesium oils, and most magnesium oils that are even labeled with the word Zextine, which most of the brands in America are using that term falsely. Ancient or genuine or any of these other kind of stickers, these self-certified logos and things, like, they're not coming from the city of Vindham, which is the one place where this source is. Very easy to call this source and ask them who's putting what in what, and they'll tell you that most of the industry is mixing or they're using Asian solvent extracted lookalikes that are sold out of the port of Holland as being from Amsterdam or from Netherlands, and so there's just a big mess there with authenticity. So if it's coming from the Vindham, it's going to have the logo. It's going to have Zechstein Inside with the trademark on the bottle. So if it doesn't have that, that's the first bet that the company is either did use it before and then switched once they expanded, which is what happens a lot. They expand, they move, they pull some of the Asian stuff in, and then they mix, or they go cosmetic with it and they create lots of creams and different things. And so sometimes they'll use a cheaper brand for that, and then they'll retain some of their stuff from the original buy, and then they'll just pretend that these marketing claims are good. You know, like they call it mixing in the industry. But most of them don't even go there. And even that mixing is still bad because it's not giving you the full spectrum. But there's people who are much worse than that who have something totally solvent extracted with even heavy metals and Tibetan exploitation. And that's 80% of the magnesium in the world comes from Tibetan exploitation in Asia. And so that's even worse. And then they'll just use the word Zextine abusively and just pretend that it's coming from Europe and just put that on the label because the word itself cannot be controlled. Just like Permian or anything else can't be controlled. Like those are geological eras. You can't put a trademark on them. But Zechstein Inside, that's different. So that's a trademark. So that's the first half. And then without that, you've got a weaker kind of molecule as the base of what you're doing. Now, after that, if you want to citrate, do all these other things, okay. Now, the problem, another thing you need to realize is in the body, the body creates all those citrates and threonates and petallates. It creates all of those in the body. None of that is not created in the body. They create this outside of the body, and it's not a bad thing. It helps speed up some things, and that's why they do it. But then they copyright it and they could sell it for more and all this stuff. So, but the body takes everything. When you eat the hydrochloric acid, it turns everything into magnesium chloride that it can bring in as elemental magnesium. It converts it into the chloride, and so it uses that base molecule. Unless it's been already converted to something. Okay, if it's already been converted beyond that chloride molecule, then no, it'll use it as it is there. And thus the supplement. But everything that's coming in the food way is being converted to that degree, and even to some degree, even the supplement, because if it's going through the stomach and there's, it's getting in contact with hydrochloric acid, this is what's happening. So that molecule is then, when you use the skin, the interesting thing about the transdermal approach is the skin, you take that fatty molecule or you take that base molecule and then through a magnesium oil that's done right, then it's going to take it through the skin, and that first layer of the skin is acidic. That's like anything with fermentation or anything with a flora, just like sauerkraut, anything that has a flora, it has an acidity. And that acidity protects as well. And so the skin is the same. It's that way. And so that skin brings about acidification processes. The fat layer, the lipid layers bring about fat properties. And so they get that chloride down in there and they conjugate with other things, and then the body can use it as it's needed. So that's the beautiful system of the transdermal approach, is having a high level of dosage going on through the skin, the biggest organ that you have on your body, and then letting that organ decide how to convert and bring that in and conjugate that with what it needs. So this is more of a whole other long-term game that we're doing here, where we stop pretending that the skin is inert and doesn't really do very much, and then we have thousands of patches on the other side of that, pretending that somehow those worlds aren't connected. It's just like the magnesium test. Like, most people know that you can't get a proper magnesium evaluation by using a typical blood test, because magnesium is stored mostly in the tissues, soft tissue, and bones and everything else. And so it's not stored in the blood. And so you can get a really bad reading on what's happening in your body through that. And doctors know that, so they use the hemoglobin test in the skin. So the red blood cells in the skin is what they're using to test. So why don't we make that connection? Okay, if it's red blood cells in the skin, then why aren't we saying that it's the skin that we need to be looking at with magnesium? Well, for some reason, there's just a disconnect there. And the industry likes that disconnect because it allows them to not have a global product that can be applied very often throughout the year, that the body will convert for it, and there's 1,000 copyrights and trademarks that are lost. And a lot of money's lost there when you just have one guy who can really help a lot of things. So just, it's kind of like the supermarket. We used to have eggs, milk, bread, and like butter, and like 4 or 5 basics, and those could build health. Now, those are the 4 or 5 things that are the hardest to get properly done in that whole grocery store that contains 95% of stuff that I can't even eat. So we've reversed reality, whereas we should have just focused on those 5 elements and made those richer and stronger and better. But we focused on everything else to kind of take away from the fact that we ruined the eggs and soy fed, and we ruined the meat, with the soy fed and grains and a lot of the other the heavy genetics of the animals. Like, they're just so big, you can't get taste from that, and you can't get health from that. You can get bad genes of obesity from that. And so we've just allowed this to happen. So anyway, so that's one half of the full spectrum. The other half is what you would call the packaging. And so how something is packaged is not only representative to its own nature, like the way that product is and what it is. It's part of its kind of like, not chakra system, but it's part of its own little creation, its own little body as a product. And so that reality, putting all this cheap magnesium, half spectrum, solvent extracted magnesium into these plastic bottles and then selling it for pennies on the dollar, and people show up and they've got a whole range of products already set up for them, sent from Asia, and it's just so easy. And you can market it as Zextine too. Like, what a ride. You don't have to pay tribute to nothing, and you can just go straight through and, don't even, pass go and collect 200 or whatever monopoly term. But so, but you don't want this, because the problem with magnesium is that it's like the keys and locks system, ionophore, and it has all of these ways to get into the cell. So when you bring a plastic molecule attached to these tentacles, plastic leached molecule, endocrine disruptor, BPA, BPS, anything, phthalates, whatever you want to call it, you bring them down into the cell. The cell, it gets a perfect delivery vehicle with magnesium. And this is the most ubiquitous mineral, the most studied mineral, and it has the most access. So it's a very dangerous thing to associate plastic with in any way. You must limit it. Now, of course, we live in a modern world and everything can't be controlled perfectly. But the limitation is important, limiting it, because sending these things and multiplying the surface area into all these glass bottles, like, it's really the multiplication of surface area. That when you put something into these user-end soft plastics at the end process of however you shipped it and got it, this is the process where you multiply by 500-fold the amount of endocrine disruptor contamination. So you want to get that down and limited, especially with magnesium. If it's with something else in your food supply, some cheese here and there or whatever, you want to limit that too, but it's not the same as magnesium. And so the magnesium is going to take it even further. Of course, they should be limited everywhere, glass, and just be kind of a stickler on that if you can. Because they're detecting all this stuff at the generally recognized levels of safe, GRAS. These levels that they're associated with the GRAS, they are causing serious problems. A lot of studies on endocrine disruptors show that the levels that we tolerate are still unhealthy. And they're figuring it out. They're figuring out that sometimes it's not. We have this old form of thinking where the higher the quantity is, then the worse it is for you. But there's also something to be said about small quantity, like small exposure, but daily and near exact. Meaning we can't get down to zero, so we stay at a certain amount of exposure daily. And then that also, by informational system, endocrine systems, and hormonal systems, like these systems feed off of that daily response to the epigenetic environment in which we bathe. Meaning we're bathing in this environment with these toxins. This is triggering the epigenetics, and they only need a certain threshold per day to get triggered. Like, for example, turn off your fertility because this stuff is coming in and we need to save other areas of the body, so let's turn off one. And so this is like the epigenetic thing. And so these things get activated through exposure. And so trying to limit that is very important, but especially at the cellular level, when you have these keys and locks that magnesium holds and bringing it all down to the middle, it's just a dirty game. And why? Why would anybody do that when they could spend, okay, it may cost you $5 for some product and then the other product costs you $10. But if they're not used very often, okay, let's put it different. It might cost you, with that $5 product, it may cost you $15 a year to take that product. And then the other guy may cost you $50 a year. Whoa, it's a lot more expensive. It may cost you that, but that's it per year, right? So you're still at $50 a year to solve the problem and get the right product. And so in that type of scenario, don't waste your money on trying to get something for cheap. That's called the illusion of price. And so get something that's valued at its true price, where it has its true value for the body and everything. And so $50 a year, anybody can reach, and that's what we recommend. But at least 2 bottles, and you do about 4 months worth. It's about $3 a week. It's not expensive, but so get it in glass. It has to be in glass bottles, and it has to be from the Zechstein Inside logo. It has to have those 2 elements going. If it has those 2 elements, you're good. The third element you could say would be make sure it's not diluted, that it's 100% the brine, it's not something else. Like sometimes they'll cut it and they'll put like no tingling, or they'll put some sort of marketing that makes you feel like, oh, this isn't going to hurt me. And so they want to take away the tingling effect, which is part of its power. And so, and they don't tell you they dilute it. They just say 100% or whatever. And so that's another thing that can happen. Also, you see people adding ingredients to the base product, which are unnecessary for the magnesium part of this formula. It's not necessary to add all of these other things together. Most of the time they do that so that they can copyright the product, because it allows them to have a range of products that are copyrighted through their own, control system. And so it doesn't mean it works better for you. So anything that's guided only by money is important, but anything that's guided only by money is going to be the wrong choice, always. So there has to be something else behind that, like you can make millions of dollars and be rich, but will that feed your heart? You know what I mean? And so it's like you can get ripped off. The rich guy could be the one who got ripped off in the end because he couldn't see that. He couldn't see that difference about how it didn't feed the heart. And so we have to be like, so it's like just about trying to find the right way. And so the full spectrum allows for greater conjugation, uptake, better bonding. We had this client who came in recently and he said he'd been using another brand, and he was a big magnesium oil person. And he was using another brand on his back, and he had these serious back problems along his spine there. And so he had to get like a lot of different treatments around the spine. And so whenever he would apply the products, he said he felt somewhat better, but then it kind of faded or whatever, which is normal because we're all deficient. So the magnesium's already going to help to some degree. So it's kind of like, that's the problem with half spectrum. Is like you go through a year or two of like doing it and you're all good, but no, you got only half of it. And so he pours the right product, which he ordered from us in glass, and he said, what was funny is I put it on the same place that I always put the other stuff. And guess what? The difference was the whole column, the whole spine was bright red where I would put the product. And I came back the next 3 days and tried it again, bright red, wherever I put your product. And so, no, sorry, not bright red where you put the product, bright red over the column of the spine while he put the product through on his whole back. It would always brighten up there. And so I was like, well, this is because that's the area that's the most in need, and there's that reddening and there's that tropism. And so he was convinced just on that alone, because it was able to see his problem to some degree. You don't always get that lucky. That was kind of like a lucky, because some of these deficiencies manifest at a deeper level in the body, not at the skin. They're not that close to the surface, like you got like hip, and there's other bone needs too that magnesium heals if it's there in a proper dose. for daily exposure. Like you have daily dose that allows for daily usage, then it will get to work on healing deeper systems. So that's one half of that's what I mean by full spectrum. And then the third element of full spectrum, there's a lot of elements here. You know, you have the non-solvent treated, you have the conditioning, meaning the bottling, the glass, the dilution you can add as a part of that, as long as they're not diluting and adding all these other substances to it to try to just copyright and make money. Sometimes you can add some things, yeah, sure. But in general, it's not necessary. And I don't even want to send essential oils down to the cell level with the magnesium, to be honest with you. It's almost like trying to eat spicy meat all the time. And it's like, hey, what's wrong with the meat, man? Can you leave the spice off and we can just see what this meat is all about? And so it's like, you don't have to always dress it up. Like the magnesium has enough power without it, and may be hindered with it. So, and then the third element of that full spectrum is just the efficiency and the detoxification. The detoxification is probably the third element that the half spectrum people don't get. The half spectrum people get base magnesium needs covered, but the full spectrum, you will get the detoxification. And not only short term, but long term and medium term. So if you're doing like this product for 4 months out of the year, or you're taking it that way, or you're a sports person who's doing it all year long, or maybe you're going through surgeries and they're taking tons of it. Sometimes they burn through like 10 bottles in a year because they're just going through it. The body's trying to heal. I mean, the body needs magnesium for everything, especially bones, but also muscles and tissues and detox. So, you know, what is a cramp? You know, a cramp is something stuck in the tissue. The magnesium comes along, helps enzymes chelate that something, acid malic, for example, with a piece of aluminum that gets in there. Boom, it takes it down, it degrades it, it gets it out through the sweat glands. So there's other ways that, or hair follicles or whatever, but it gets it out. And either way, that's still a skin process, I guess you could say. And so this third element is the key to the magnesium mystery, is really getting the detoxification to happen, and especially aluminum. The aluminum is a big piece of that. Now, magnesium also chelate in the sweat, and you know they record these, you know, athletes with their sweat, and they see endocrine disruptors in sweat and magnesium coming out. You know, and so they know that there's a process of this elimination of these endocrine disruptors through a sort of aeration / transpiration process. You know, they did this test on monkeys, and they had the same thing. They figured out that the monkeys, when they would stop being exposed to these chemicals, they would go back to normal. They could re-put the square peg in the square hole again. And so they saw it happen very quickly. So there is hope that, you know, once you start controlling your environment to some degree, boundaries, I guess you could call that, then you will be able to, get much further. And then the magnesium will come in there and help you detox what's in there. So you need the detoxification part of it, not only for the aluminum, mercury, and other heavy metals, but also for the endocrine disruptors, the acid residues, which cause aging, and lactic acid, and all these things that tend to, cramp up and keep the muscle from being able to heal properly. That's why it was a big boon for sports people. So that was a long podcast, longer than I thought. I wish I could have got that out in about 2 minutes, but that triple spectrum, that trinity of the full spectrum, I guess you could say, or threefold, that is the key to doing the magnesium cure to the right way, applying it and being able to get the most out of it. Now, it would suck to go through all that and not get the most out of it, And so that's kind of like the half spectrum ripoff. The half spectrum ripoff, you're good, you made it through the deficiency, everybody's happy, but you can't really do any above ground work at that point. It's all just getting back up to the zero, ground zero. So, come check our products out at theheartoftradition.com. Don't get the fake stuff. Don't go cheap. $25 for 2 months, $3 a week, glass bottles, theheartoftradition.com.